So is Kopakumar here?
He was here. He was here.
Yeah. Okay, great.
It's named is my colleague's name, Pradibha. But it's
okay, great. Excellent.
You are under disguise.
So I guess we could start to begin, more or less. Stepan, what do you say? Anton?
Yes, I think we can start. 30 minutes.
Good. Yeah.
Okay. So, okay, I'll then just run some very brief introduction, if it's okay. So, hello everyone. On behalf of the Civil BRICS Working Group on Food and Healthcare, so I would like to thank you very much for joining this webinar. My name is Sergey Golov, and I represent Treatment Preparedness Coalition in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Currently co-chair of this working group on food and healthcare of the Civil BRICS. And I would like to thank Stepan Kanaki.
Sergey, just 1 second.
Sure, absolutely.
I guess you have switched on another PC or mobile phone, because we have echo here.
That's very strange, because, okay, I can switch off my mobile. Let's see if it's better. Is it better?
Yeah.
It's better. Okay, fine. I switched off my mobile. So now it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Great, wonderful. Okay, so very important discussions ahead of us. Yeah, I was thanking Stepan and Anton Zikov from MSF for taking the initiative for organizing this event on COVID-19 vaccines, IP, BRICS. So we have very important discussions ahead of us, as I've said, and the information, the messages and ideas we take from this will be used as a basis for developing recommendations from our Civil BRICS group for the BRICS leaders. So with a bit of luck, I hope to finalize these by the end of September, and then we're going to publish it for further distribution, dissemination, and discussion, of course. So our webinar today will focus on several important issues related to COVID-19 vaccine development and the role that BRICS countries can play and, in fact, are already playing here. So right now, there are countries and companies racing towards bringing a vaccine to the market, and some of them are already on phase 3 clinical trials. And those include the Oxford and AstraZeneca vaccine, the Russian Gamaleya Research Institute one, the Moderna, mRNA 1273. There are also several Chinese vaccines entering phase 3. And while some of the preliminary results look promising in terms of generation immune response, now the key challenges we're facing, all of us, include successful completion of phase 3 trials and proving that the vaccine candidates are actually safe and effective enough to be brought to people. Then, of course, commercializing them and making them available for as many people as possible and as fast as possible. And this brings us to several issues, including but not limited to vaccine distribution plans, manufacturing capacities, issues of patent monopolies. And these issues are already high on the agenda when it comes to discussions related to COVID-19 vaccines. So some of you may have heard about protests in front of the Moderna office in Boston about the Free the Vaccine campaign, as well as other campaigns where people are demanding that the companies and governments already at this stage come up with transparent vaccine distribution plans. Though, well, we know that the market entry is not likely to happen until the beginning of next year. There are in fact some global initiatives aimed at accelerating access to COVID-19 vaccine. And one example is the COVAX initiatives, which you've probably all heard of. And the BRICS countries, as you know, have been significantly impacted by the epidemic. There's 3 BRICS countries in the top 4 in terms of absolute numbers of COVID-19 infections. And at the same time, our countries are at the forefront of combating the epidemic. We're running own vaccine development and participating in large multinational trials. And as we noted during the first webinar we organized, that the BRICS countries, they have plenty of trial and manufacturing capacities, and we have extensive experience of using flexibilities of the patent laws to ensure broad access to medicines and vaccines. And there are already a number of lessons we have learned from the HIV, hepatitis C, TB, and cancer response. And I'm sure we can and should use these lessons for the COVID-19 response. So this was a brief introduction, and all of this we're going to touch upon today with our distinguished speakers. So now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Anton Zykov from the Moscow Office of Doctors Without Borders, and he'll also say a couple of words about the upcoming webinar and introduce our speakers. So Anton, over to you, I guess.
Thanks a lot, Sergey. It's really a very comprehensive sort of introduction to what we are now facing with the development of the vaccine and the social processes that accompany it. And we as MSF were co-initiators together with Civil BRICS, with Stepan, of this discussion because we attach a greater social importance to the issues of access to the vaccine and its availability for those who need it, not just those who can afford it. I'm sure that a colleague of mine, Felipe, would follow up on this later on. But now I would like to give a floor to someone who has a long-term record involving with social effects of COVID and the possible consequences of the vaccine introduction, a professor at Cape Town University, and someone who worked for years with the BRICS think tank. It's Dr. Siras. Ari, the floor is yours.
Oops. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you very well.
All right. Okay, thank you. Now, I think the way of approaching this is with a certain sense of alarm about it, because we're living through a major disruption, and it's as if it is the beginning of major disruptions to come. It is a pandemic, yes, but there are others waiting in the wings. And it seems that sometimes our capacities at national, regional, or local level to cope with events like these have been found to be lacking. We tried to respond as vigorously as possible in South Africa, as you all know. We went through strict lockdowns to start with. We started freeing things up slowly. The scientists and the doctors and the sociologists and the anthropologists and the civil society organizations all tried to participate in giving voice or interpretation of what was going on. And, you know, it just escalated and escalated. And the phenomenon in South Africa seems to spell the following. Firstly, that the infections are increasing, especially in areas that experience high inequality, the so-called hotspots. Yet at the same time, deaths are on the low register. Okay, of course, 15,000 deaths are tragic by any counting, but per million of the population are still quite low. So every resource in the country has gone in terms of in the fight back against this pandemic, and everybody's, as was mentioned, beginning to work on what could the solutions be. Our participation in some of the vaccine research is happening, and it's sad for me because already in 2018 we thought we could put together a collective response through BRICS, instead now of competing of who is going to be first past the 100-meter Usain Bolt race. Of course, you know, we need it fast, but we know it has to be slow. And, you know, what we were trying to do in BRICS a few years back starting from 2015, 2016, 2017, is to get our scientists together to deal not only with SARS then, but also to deal with other viruses, the Zika, the Ebola, HIV/AIDS. Then we move to bacilli like TB or malaria, all those diseases that are really, really affecting the majority of our people in Africa and in South Africa. So we thought that BRICS could be leading the way in terms of cooperating, creating centers of extreme cooperation where borders don't matter, where patents and private property doesn't matter when it comes to the saving of lives of our people. And that was accepted by our leaderships, was accepted in 2018 in Johannesburg. It was a big pressure from South Africa to keep it on the agenda. It was accepted in Brasilia the year after, and it is there. But de facto, we are not cooperating as to the extent that we should have been. Hopefully, this pandemic brings us much closer together. The other thing we experienced is that science has its day, the epidemiologists had their day, but after a while, after the lockdowns start getting less harsh, it becomes a battle of lobby groups within a society and various interest groups that are fragmenting the unity of the message that comes through government, and then polarizes situations in civil society with a lot of people feeling very aggrieved in this process. And we all know the enormous effort our doctors, our nurses, and all the auxiliaries have put in at a great cost to their lives and their livelihoods to combat this. And we need to take this moment and reflect and think of how it shouldn't happen like this again. We should have the systems in place as BRICS, as nation states, as civil societies to respond effectively to all these disruptions that will be coming our way. And then at the same time, it pointed a spotlight on the capacity of our public goods and our public resources and our hospitals and our systems in terms of their veracity and their ability to respond properly to this. It is a vicious virus. Some of my friends think that it's also a stupid virus because it tends to kill its host instead of, like TB, to get very, very clever. It's not a virus, but get very clever and stay there on forever. But still, it affects the social fabric. It affects the actual social relationship that exists in each society to its core. It's brought about a new normal that was unthinkable a few years back. And therefore, a focus on what our capacities are as civil society and as a public sector respond to these challenges will be a major focus. And I think we should be talking about, let's call it living rights. Not human rights, but living rights. Your right not to be infected, your right to be protected, the right to make sure that those with the know-hows and the knowledge and the skills and the capacities are there to service your life and livelihoods in the future. So, this idea perhaps of living rights should be something that comes very strongly to civil societies in the BRICS domain, because it has been our responsibility and we failed to protect many, many people as this unfolded. Alas, we have not experienced something like this before. And hopefully this becomes a major lesson to all of us. I would like to end now and keep any further comments for for the discussion. And all I'm pleading for people is that civil society should demand a new set of ethical approaches to dealing with these pandemics. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ari. That was really, that sounds very much like a call to action. And if no one has questions at the moment, I would use my privilege as a co-moderator of this event and to ask, you've said that there should be a right to be protected from the virus. So do you think that healthcare should be not a privilege but a right, and the vaccine, by extension of that, ipso facto, should also be a right in a way, because there's obviously a lot of competition going on. It seems that the media is focused on whatever country reaches stage 3 and then reaches stage 4. There are indicators, so it turns out to be in a competition where you have kind of national resources and national pride at stake rather than what you have mentioned. So what steps do you think we as civil society, as NGOs, as civil society of the BRICS states could take? We have an opportunity to send our recommendations to the political part of BRICS that Sergey and Stepan are working on. So what do you think we can do? What is in our hands that we can accomplish? Thank you.
Well, immediately I can think of 3 little things. Firstly, to hold leaderships accountable to their promises already signed as agreements, to get our systems to work together for the public good in our societies and work together towards it, not in competition when it comes to these issues of the pandemic. Now, had this virus not attacked the rich as much as the poor, I don't know whether there would have been much interest in developing any vaccine about it, because it wouldn't have been profitable like all the other vaccines we know don't exist because they are not pharmaceutically profitable. And this idea of getting all these, creating centers of cooperation around these lethal diseases that primarily hit the poorer sections of our society would be a priority and a public good. And therefore, we shouldn't be thinking of it as a profit-making competitive enterprise, but as a humanistic act, as was promised. The second thing is that civil society, it is something that happens to people. It is affecting every nook and cranny of people's lives. But these things are invisible to the eye. You can't build a kind of an everyday experience around what flies through the air. One needs the protection of the areas of know-how, of the institutions that can analyze and understand what is going on and how these are spread. And therefore, that's what I mean by your right to be protected. Your right to be, to have the early warning systems in government, in local authorities that say, phew, it's malaria time again, or it's Zika is on the increase, and so on. Once people know, they know how to act. We've experienced it here in South Africa, that people in informal settlements are quite aware of what is going on at the moment, but they're caught in that contradiction between protecting life and earning their livelihoods. And to earn their livelihoods, they have to get out. They can't be working from home in any way. And therefore, all those places of transport and workplaces and so on become where, the place where they incubate the spread of the disease. But people know, but they know what the tension is, and they will act accordingly and put pressure on the authorities to be protected. Yeah. And my third little response is that for the first time in the last 30 years, certain professions that were ignored have become valuable. The care economy has become important again. The nursing profession has become important again. The actual authorities that are looking after the neighborhoods and so on, the community development workers, the social workers, all those people that were not essential to the market have become the heroines and heroes of this little fight back that we have. And they have to be looked after, not only praised, not only for media shoots, but to be protected, being made safe, encouraged, being paid properly. And the care economy has to be brought back into focus. Those are my three responses. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ari. That was a comprehensive response to the question that I've asked. I wonder if anyone else has something to add or to follow up or to ask Ari. Okay, and if not, then...
Yeah, well, sorry. This is Sergey, also co-moderator. I wanted to ask a question. Thank you, Ari, for the brilliant...
Please, Sergey.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you, Ari, for the brilliant presentation and discussion. And I wanted to ask you a more specific question about the BRICS Vaccine Development Center that was proposed, I think, by South Africa in 2018. So do you, by any chance, know whether there have been any developments very recently in view of the COVID-19 pandemic, any specific steps that have been taken? And do you think this, well, judging by your presentation, I take it it's very important that we have more cooperation, but I wanted to hear your thoughts on these initiatives, whether it's still relevant and any specific steps that have been taken recently you are aware of. That would be great to hear. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, the design and the plans and everything are there in place, and the leading people in South Africa and the Medical Research Council are there ready for it, and a lot, but they have been caught in now, whom do you work with in order to develop the vaccine, and how do you respond in terms of the actual spread of the pandemic? So they're working kind of 20 hours a day, doing diagnostics and statistics and so on for the government's response at this stage in time. So the practicalities have come in the way, and also this inability, our slowness in terms of getting the scientific protocols together to start working together has not made the initiative fly high enough as we all expected it to, because it would have been a kind of a fantastic story to be able to tell to BRICS. But all the elements are there. It just takes now the will to and the resources to start getting it done. There is much more emphasis on TB at the moment, and South Africa is quite a very solid center of knowledge and research around TB, and a lot of the Southern African countries are involved, and there are there has been some cooperation with Brazil on that front, and that's the strong side. COVID is on the agenda, but hey, at the moment it's who is going to be there first. The scientists themselves, they know each other, so they're talking to each other. They're helping each other despite the publicity stunts that our various countries are involved in. They have come to know each other over the last 10 years. And they are talking, but they are in separate tracks, running, kind of something, if I marathon race, something a sprint. So That's where we are, Sergey. Now I could, as we are talking, I could make a phone call and come back with more practical, exactly what is going on now. I will do that, and towards the end, bring you the latest news if need be. So, Sergey, I hope I've answered your question. I'm not satisfied with my answer. I wanted to have a much more precise and definitive answer, but that's what I think is going on.
Well, thank you very much, Harry. That's very comprehensive, and if you can get us more information, that would be even better. It's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess that we need to move on to the next speaker. But if you would think of an answer that you have a question that you want to ask Ari, you can still do it after the rest of the speakers have finished talking, because we have some space and a bit of time reserved for discussion at the end of it. Okay, so let us move on to our second speaker. It's Felipe de Carvalho from Brazil, who is a journalist, and he holds a degree in international political economy from University of Rio de Janeiro, and he has been working with MSF, my colleague, since 2009 in the Access campaign. For you who have not heard about it, it's the campaign that is actively promoted by MSF. It's been a couple of decades already, even more, to make sure that there is sufficient pressure on pharmaceutical companies to not only gain profit, but provide access to the needed vaccines or medications, other health tools to those who cannot afford it, and also pressure on the governments to make sure that the public money, public funds, our own taxes spent on healthcare and spent on research and development and directed to the big pharmaceutical companies come up with back to the taxpayers with concrete medical solutions and tools. And he, I know, is very much engaged with those issues with regard to the pandemics, how the healthcare tools and the vaccine eventually could be available to those who need it. So over to Felipe. You also have your 15 minutes, and we'll have a bit of time reserved for a couple of questions.
Thank you, Anton. Thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be at this discussion. Thanks for the organizers for preparing this important debate. And I'm happy to contribute from my experience with the Access campaign, as Anton already introduced. So the title of my presentation will be COVID-19 vaccines in the context of economic inequality, and what can the BRICS countries do to ensure universal access. And I would like first to start. Can everybody hear me? It's okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, all good.
I would just like to start introducing MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, for those that doesn't know the organization. It's an international independent medical humanitarian organization that provides healthcare to people affected by the worst humanitarian crises, like armed conflicts, natural disasters, epidemics, extreme exclusion. And the organization actions are basically guided by medical ethics and three important principles, which are independence, neutrality, and impartiality. And in order to preserve these principles, it's very important to say that the organization is basically supported by individuals. So we don't have any connections with any political or economic power. So that what enables us to act independently and based only on the health needs. And also neutrality means that we don't take any sides, and impartiality, that we provide care to all who need them, regardless of religion, gender, race. So we focus a lot in many areas, but especially over the last years, we have been dealing with HIV, TB, malaria. We also work a lot with vaccination, both in routine vaccination programs, supporting ministers of health in different countries, but also doing vaccinations during outbreaks. We also have been working a lot with nutrition and in partnership to provide surgery training and hospital care in many countries. MSF was created in 1971, and in 1999, MSF was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And what we also do is that from the perspective of the most affected places, of the most vulnerable populations, of the most resource-poor settings, we also observe how the medical innovation system works. And it actually often neglects or excludes the populations that we serve. So we, since 1999, when we got the Nobel Peace Prize, we decided to create the Access campaign exactly to change this context of access crisis and try to respond and make sure that everybody can have access to the best medical treatments available. And not only people in our projects, but also in all developing low and middle income countries as a whole. So as we have this expertise on responding to epidemics, of course, we are quite involved in the response to the COVID-19 crisis. So this is more or less today the countries where we are doing some sort of activity or collaboration with ministers of health in addressing this unprecedented crisis. And our focus has been mostly not only responding to COVID-19, but also making sure that healthcare continues, that vaccination, for example, for other disease continues, and that there is not dismantlement of the health system's capacities. Also, we have been focusing a lot in protecting medical staff because they are in the front line of this very dangerous response. We are also focusing a lot on at-risk populations like the elderly that are more vulnerable, especially working in nursing houses. And finally, in vulnerable populations that are normally excluded from healthcare in general, like migrants, people living on streets, and indigenous communities, all sorts of vulnerable groups. So for example, in Brazil, we are working already in 5 states, different states, and a lot in collaboration with local authorities to address the needs of these hard to reach populations like homeless, migrants, indigenous. We are today already working in 11 indigenous communities in Brazil. And our main message when it comes to access to medicines during this pandemic have been 3 basically. So the first one is no patents and no profiteering on the medical tools that are being developed, because we believe that these products should not be a luxury for anyone, that only the wealth countries can access or the wealth people can access. In a pandemic like this, and actually in any pandemic, doesn't make any sense to have the effective products under monopoly, because this limits supply and also drives the prices up. And the COVID-19 pandemic will not end until it ends for everyone, everywhere. So we are quite concerned that monopolies will not allow this to happen. If we are in a situation of rationing of treatments, the pandemic will last much longer. And then we need to call companies, especially, not to enforce patents on vaccines, drugs, diagnostics. But also, we are calling governments to use the legal tools they have to make monopolies, to dismiss monopolies, like compulsory license can be used for that purpose. So that's something we have been saying since the beginning of the pandemic, but we know that so far many companies have actually filed for patents on vaccines and many other products. And some prices are already quite inaccessible for many countries. So we are also in favor of the view that vaccines, for example, should be global public goods, which means that they should be sold at cost. They should not have monopolies on them, and all the data and know-how should be widely shared so many producers can come and produce, and we have enough quantities for everybody, for all countries. And lastly, as Anton said, we are calling for strings attached on basically public funding that is going to these research and development efforts. We know that including for the vaccines, there is millions of public funds going to the projects, and this money cannot simply go to the hands of big pharmaceutical companies without any conditions attached, especially conditions on transparency, conditions on accessibility, affordability. And unfortunately, in many countries, and actually also at international level, some agencies are just providing funds for pharmaceutical companies without any conditions. So every time public fund is implied, there should be more conditions to ensure access. That's something we are also focusing a lot in our message. And before going into more details on COVID and the vaccine issues, I would like to remind us all about other pandemics that we have faced until today, and how the access to medicines issues are appearing in these other areas. So if we look to the most impactful infectious disease that we have today in the world, like HIV/AIDS, hepatitis C, and tuberculosis, that includes also resistant forms of the disease, we have a very concerning situation because, for example, on HIV/AIDS, it has been already 24 years after the approval of the first therapies. And yet today we still have 33% of the people in need who doesn't have access to the treatment. So it means that the speed in which we can put everybody on treatment is quite slow, and monopolies on drugs have been a major factor behind that. In the beginning, a lot of people simply died because the prices were too high. And we saw the same thing happening with hepatitis C more recently. In 7 years ago, there were a new class of drugs that were approved and came into market. But today, out of the 71 million people in need of hepatitis C treatment, 86% are still without treatment. Without this treatment that actually cures the disease in 3 months. But we just had 14% of people getting this treatment in 7 years. And with resistant TB, the situation is even worse. We have new drugs that came to market 8 years ago, and 92% of people are still waiting to get access to bedaquiline, which is a drug that is now considered by WHO as the most important one for new regimens of treatment. So we can see that this issue of access, it's constant in every pandemic that we face. And actually the access crisis is the norm, not the exception. And it's something that is across all countries, rich countries, poor countries alike. All of them face the access crisis. And actually the speed in which we respond to pandemics, it's connected to how we deal with the monopolies over the drugs, how the pharmaceutical companies behave. And this is not only for drugs, but also for vaccines. We have an example on pneumonia vaccine that is not a pandemic as such. The other ones were declared at some point as a pandemic. Pneumonia is not declared as a pandemic, but is the major cause of death of children below 5 years in the world today. So we as MSF, we have been trying to vaccinate as much as we can, especially vulnerable children in refugee camps, but the prices have been a major problem, a major barrier for years. We have campaigned for the companies to expose the high prices that they were charging and ask them to reduce. But yet today, 25% of the countries in the world are not even have not even introduced pneumonia vaccine. So that's very worrisome. It's a very dangerous disease, and a lot of children are unprotected. And the main reason is the price in most of those countries. There are some countries where like the expenditures with this vaccine represent 60% of the total budget of the vaccination package. So it's really an issue that is also related to a monopoly. So I'm bringing these examples to show that normally we have very bad precedents when it comes to access to important essential medicines and vaccines, and that we are normally in the hands of a few multinational pharmaceutical companies that decide who lives and who dies. And the big question today is if we will let this happen again with COVID-19. So we should also start to look more to what has worked in the past. We know that for sure generic competition is something that it's totally supportive of treatment scale up. This has happened quite clearly on HIV when we had like the price drop of the generic medicines, but also the brand version had a price drop, as you can see in the red line. But the point is that when the treatments were very expensive, a few countries were really willing to start treatment programs. And as the price dropped, we saw more people in low and middle income countries getting on treatment. And it's important to say that BRICS countries at this decade, like 2001 and 2010, BRICS was not formally organized as a bloc. Only in the end of the decade, the BRICS coalition started to get together. But the countries that are now part of the BRICS at the year 2000s, they have played very important roles in market shaping by producing generic drugs in Brazil, in India, in China, in Russia, and also having an important role on health diplomacy by supporting important declarations, resolutions, especially the Doha Declaration that said that countries have the right to protect health and to do everything they can using the flexibilities of patent laws to make sure people have access to treatment. So this group of countries were already important voices, and in the next decade they became a bloc. And it's important to say that at least on health, BRICS have been meeting regularly every year, and they do ministerial summits. And also from some years back, they started to do ministerial meetings at the World Health Assemblies. So here I tried to review the declarations issued by the BRICS Ministers of Health and selected some topics to show like the level of commitment with some of these agendas. So here we have ministerial meetings at the World Health Assembly, ministerial health summits, and presidential summits. And the first column, it's the total number of time that such meetings happened. So we have 6 ministerial meetings at WHA, 9 ministerial health summits, and 9 presidential summits. And the topic of TRIPS flexibilities to ensure access to drugs is quite present. It's present in all the health declarations and in 3 of the presidential summits. Another important topic is new innovation models that is quite strong also in the health declarations and has appeared quite often in the presidential summits. I selected tuberculosis because together the BRICS have a great burden of tuberculosis. 50% of the world cases are in the BRICS countries, and they are, as the previous speaker said, also focusing a lot on tuberculosis as a common objective. So this is also quite present in all levels. And there is also the discussion about the importance of WHO and what is called WHO reform discussion is something that the BRICS have been paying a lot of attention to make sure that WHO remains important decision-making body with member states oversight and not something else that is controlled by non-state actors and things like that. So BRICS have been quite vocal also in this topic when it comes to the health declarations. Here it's a bit hard to read, but the idea is that, for example, one of the topics is new innovation models, and I would like to focus on that because I think that's the biggest contribution BRICS countries can provide at this point to respond to the pandemic, but also beyond this pandemic. As you can see, every year in the health ministerial declarations, there are important statements about how to create more sustainable models for research and development, how to promote knowledge sharing, using principles as the linkage, that is basically disconnect the cost of research and development from the final price of the products. That would be something that would help to promote access. There is a lot of reference to creating a consortia of researchers, and that's true for tuberculosis. There is already an existing network that was created in 2017. There is innovative R&D approaches, transparency in R&D costs. So a lot of very important principles are present already in the BRICS declarations when it comes to new forms of doing R&D that not necessarily depend on a monopoly, depend on secrecy, depend on controlling the technologies. The declarations point to another approach, which is more like sharing information, doing sustainable models of financing, of transparency. So that's very important to keep in mind. And also to mention that BRICS have some concrete cooperation initiatives that we can, this is just a few examples, but the BRICS-TB Research Network, it's already created, already have terms of reference, regular meetings. Of course, the joint research projects take some time to organize, and we hope this work keep being prioritized because TB is being heavily affected during this pandemic because people are not being able to get tests and treatment. So it's very important to maintain the commitments with the response to TB and investments on TB research. So the BRICS TB network, it's important to continue, but it's a reference of how the countries can find ways to organize around common needs. The BRICS also have a framework for science, technology, and innovation that this year have opened a call for applications on COVID. I imagine that it's finalizing now, and there should be some funding going to important projects. There is also, it was already mentioned, the BRICS Vaccine Research and Development Center that was planned but not implemented. And there is the New Development Bank that has announced this year also some loans and assistance for the BRICS countries to respond to the COVID crisis. So what we think is important to happen when it comes to BRICS is that the principles that are in the declarations are combined with the initiatives that are already being prepared. So that the transparency on R&D funds, the rules that will ensure access to the result of R&D should be present. All these principles that BRICS have been highlighting for years should also be connected to all these initiatives that deal with funding and coordination. And that's my last slide.
Sorry to jump in. I'm very sorry. It's very interesting what you're saying. I'm just here to remind you of the time. So,
yeah, that's my last slide. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
I was not able to put my counting here. Sorry, but I will go fast on this one. So basically, and we can come back in the discussion. What can the BRICS countries do? In our view, make full use of TRIPS flexibilities to ensure universal access. And also think of other country needs. BRICS can have this role of being regional or global suppliers for other countries. And when we talk to flexibilities, this can go beyond only patents and also include trade secrets, designs, know-how. And South Africa has put a proposal at the World Trade Organization about that very recently. That is very interesting. Another option would be also consider the temporary suspensions of IP rights on COVID technologies. That can be also put in place by WHO. And here in red, the thing that I think it's the most important contribution that BRICS can give, it's create a new model of innovation where the access comes in the very beginning of the innovation cycle. And when there is public funds, there are very specific conditions on transparency, on accessibility, affordability, non-patentability, and non-exclusive licenses, and BRICS can be a pioneer on that if they follow what is already in the declarations. There is an important role to play in initiatives like COVAX that were mentioned in the beginning, because we think developing countries should have a voice in how decisions will be made on pricing and distribution. And finally, facilitate mass production of vaccines. So BRICS are already part of the network of developing countries' vaccine manufacturers and can contribute to reduce prices, expand production, receive, but also promote technology transfer to other countries, and that can contribute to make sure that everybody gets vaccinated and that we have enough supply to everybody. Sorry to going beyond my time, and that's it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot, Felipe. I think it was a very rich presentation. You made several very crucial points that we'll be able to follow up later in the discussion. But I know that, and so we have time just for one question. I know that Sergey had a very pressing one, so over to Sergey.
Yeah, if unless anyone from the participants also wants to ask something pressing, if not, then okay. Then thank you, Felipe, for the wonderful presentation. It's very briefly. So I may be wrong, but I think the BRICS countries so far have not taken too many steps in the field of patent rights and access to treatment in the field of coronavirus. We have examples of Canada and Germany and Israel making some amendments in their laws and even issuing compulsory licenses for certain products, and knowing that BRICS countries have very rich experience in this field. I know that there was an initiative in Brazil about this bill for automatic compulsory licensing of all patents related to COVID. I think 1462, if I'm not mistaken. Is there any news about what's happening? Has it been adopted? What's the progress? Can you update us, please?
Yeah, no, very quickly, in Brazil, there is this law bill that has been getting actually a lot of support from different parliamentarians from different parties. So it now has already 14 authors that range from all sorts of political parties. And there is already an urgency requirement for the voting of this bill. And the Congress, of course, has a limited functioning due to the pandemic. So voting sessions are sometimes hard to happen. But yeah, there has been a lot of attention by parliamentarians in Brazil to this bill and support. But yeah, we are still waiting for the voting session. So if we look to countries, there is exactly countries that already use compulsory license, countries that already finalize reforms, and countries that are doing reforms. So Brazil is in this category together with Colombia, Ecuador, Chile, other countries in the region that are also going on that route. And about other BRICS, I don't have precise information, but there was this proposal by South Africa also around TRIPS flexibilities that got support from other BRICS countries. There have been some statements in India about the vaccines being produced there not being patented and things like that. So yeah, I think it's an important point to follow from now on.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot to Sergey for his question, and to Felipe, and I'll call upon other participants to also ask. Do not hesitate to ask questions should they have any for our speakers, or just the follow-ups. And in the meantime, I suggest that we proceed to the last speaker of this session. It's Mr. K.M. Gopal Kumar. Who is a legal advisor at the Third World Network, and we have briefly touched upon this issue in this last question, as the issue of patents and legal side of the story. And the Third World Network that Mr. Gopal Kumar represents here, it's a non-independent, it's an independent non-profit that works on research and advocacy. And I know that it has, since June, and Mr. Gopal Kumar would correct me if I'm wrong, published a report on intellectual property that touches also upon the issue of patenting for the vaccines, or for the vaccine against COVID-19. So I would ask now Mr. Gopal Kumar to further elaborate on this point. You also have 15 minutes, which would be followed up with a couple of questions. Mr. Gopal Kumar, over to you.
Thank you, Anton. It's basically my colleague who follows the patent or IP disputes related to vaccines in US, and he has written 3 such reports, and I pasted those on the chat box in the chat box, and people are requested to read those reports. I'll start from where Philpi just left it, the idea of scaling up of productions of vaccines in the, at least in the BRICS countries. So what are the why instead of there are barriers? Okay, before discussing with the barriers, I think why there should be scaling up of production. As of now, the WHO resolution, there is an international initiative as per the UN resolution as well as for the WHO resolution to ensure a fair and equitable access. And WHO has finalized global allocation mechanism. Under that global allocation mechanism, the delivering mechanism for vaccine is the COVAX facility. 3% of the population will be initially covered. That is basically health workers, and then progressively move to cover people above 65 years, and then people with comorbidities. So this is the plan, and as per the plan, around 20% of the population would be covered by end of next year. If everything goes well, if we have a vaccine by the beginning of next year. So that shows that there is a huge gap between the demand and the supply. And further, the COVAX document reveals that the pricing mechanism, currently the pricing is based on cost-based pricing. So that will last only to cover this 20% of the population. Beyond that, there will be a market-based pricing. The industry will ask for a market-based mechanism. So the COVAX facility is supposed to cover only up to 20% of the population. Beyond that, there will be changes in the price. If that happens, when the prices are going to go up, there would be an access problem. And so there would be then a mechanism to ensure that these vaccines are available at an affordable price. The best way, as we have seen in the earlier slides, that is to have competition in the market. And how do we ensure competition? Basically, more and more manufacturers produce these vaccines, one vaccine or multiple vaccines, which would come in the market or approved by the various regulatory agencies. But when we look at it, so even during the WHO, many political leaders or the heads of government stated that COVID vaccine is a global public good. At the same time, the WHO resolution did not declare that it is a global public good. It simply said that the vaccination is a global public good, not the vaccine. But the leaders repeatedly said that it's a global public good, including the WHO or UN Secretary General. So if we imagine, or if we translate, imagine a vaccine as a public good and translate that imagination into action, we need to have much more decentralized production, or and many more producers in the market, and they are supposed to drive down the price. So in order to facilitate such a decentralized production, we need to have technology transfer. The technology transfer will face various barriers. So one of the important barriers will be from the intellectual property side. There are two intellectual property protection forms of protection may act as a barrier. The first one is patent. All of us know that the patent in the vaccine, when it comes to vaccine, there could be multiple patents, including the genetic material to the vaccine delivery device. So there could be many type of patents. So the patent landscaping of vaccine reveals that even in when we come to say HPV vaccine, there are 81 patents filed from US in PCT applications. So similarly with the other vaccines also, there are 23 patents applications have been located by the landscape studies related to certain influenza virus. So there could be what I'm saying, that there would be multiple patents and covering various aspects of the vaccine, including formulations, dosage, etc., etc. So so patent would definitely act as a barrier. And we have seen reports that China has granted a patent on one of the vaccines candidate. Then there is already a patent dispute between a Canadian company and Moderna related to the Moderna vaccine. So there are these disputes may come up, but when it comes to patent, BRICS countries can do a few things. The most important thing is that to implement make use of the flexibilities. So the first flexibility is that there should not be any patent protection for the genetic materials, which is isolated from these viruses. So that's the most important step should be taken. And if there are certain patents other than on related to formulations, etc., then the countries can use the flexibilities like compulsory license. But end of the day, these are what the use of these flexibilities will ensure is a legal framework or legal freedom to operate, without any legal consequences or without any claim on the patent infringement. So it provides a freedom to operate. But there won't be any technology transfer. These technologies needs to be developed by the companies who wants to use these patents. Nobody is going to give them these technologies. So there should be a capability to use these technologies. So that takes us to the next barrier. That's the barriers which are very much act as a barrier in the context of vaccines. That's a barrier coming from the know-how or the trade secret. The know-hows are protected as trade secret. So these trade secrets will not be shared with the competitors or with the would not be put in the public domain. As a result, the companies who are trying to develop the vaccine needs to overcome these barriers using their own technological capabilities. So while doing that, unlike patent, there will not be any kind of infringement of know-how. The trade secret infringement will come if you use the undue methods or undue means to gain that know-how. Say, for example, you poach the person who is working there in the rival's company, or you steal the data, through hacking the computers, etc. So this may result in violation of trade secret. But otherwise, if you use these your own technological abilities to find out these trade secrets and then overcome the challenges of know-how, then there will not be any kind of infringement. But having said this, But when it comes to vaccine, the know-how barrier is in a way is a greater barrier than a patent barrier many times. Why? Because the know-how is inextricably linked to the regulatory framework. I mean, regulatory framework is the mechanism wherein which to provide the marketing approval for the vaccine. So without the regulatory approval, you won't be in a position to market that vaccine. So these regulatory requirements basically very much linked to the know-how. So I'll explain how it is linked. In the case of small molecule, all of us know that we call it generic drugs are available. How it becomes generic? After the expiry of the patent, a non-originator produces that product and brings into the market. In order to obtain the generic marketing approval, the non-originator company need not to replicate any kind of clinical trials. There are certain regulatory agencies will ask for a bioequivalency and bioavailability test. Okay, that's a short test. It takes around 2 months or 3 months to complete, and then you can bring the medicine. The only on the generic company is to prove that what the generic company is producing. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes.
Yeah.
Everything is fine.
Yeah, everything is fine. Yeah.
The only onus on the company is to show that this particular product they are producing is same as same product of the originator. Okay, so that's only burden. So you don't need to replicate all these clinical trial requirements. But in the case of vaccine, there is no such abbreviated regulatory pathway. Every vaccine is treated as a separate new biological entity. As a result, you have to replicate all these research. There might be some exceptions can be provided if it is exactly the same know-how and same procedure. If you change any production methods, or if you are not using the exact characterization of the genetic materials, etc., then there is a burden. So this link between the know-how and the regulatory framework creates a know-how barrier as a greater barrier. So even there is no abbreviated pathway to approve vaccine. We do have a non-originator marketing approval pathway for biotherapeutics, but we don't have such thing existing for vaccines. So we do need to have some kind of regulatory reform also. So that takes us to my most important point, is that we need to have a sharing policy by the government to share these trade secrets. How can the government can act? Because trade secret is with me, and if I say I'm not willing to share, then what can government do actually? But the government can do two things. First, most of these vaccines are receiving public funding, and therefore it's a public money. So then the outcome of this public funded research cannot be kept as a trade secret. And secondly, as part of the regulatory approval, most of these companies need to submit not all trade secret, but some great degree of the know-how as part of their dossiers. So these dossiers can be shared with the non-originator companies to accelerate the production of the non-originator vaccine, or you can say follow-on vaccines. Okay, so then the question comes, whether the TRIPS agreement 39.3 asks you to protect the data, the test data protection, but there is an exception. A public health ways, you can always provide an exception. You can share the data, because it prevents only an unfair competition. There is nothing unfair about it. We are dealing with a pandemic, and in that pandemic situation, it is important to make such a public health intervention. So So I would say the actions are, first, to sum it up, first, we need to use all the flexibilities to overcome the flexibilities, that including denial of patents on certain certain medicine, and if possible to suspend the patents related to any kind of technology which is useful for pandemic intervention. So that's the way it should be. And second, we need to have policies and measures to share the know-how, very proactive basis. So authorities should take measures. And thirdly, there should be regulatory reform. Regulator should not there should be a pro-access regulatory framework, rather than in the name of quality to prevent the access. And lastly, whether all these mechanisms can then sharing happens, whether the technology transfer can really take place, and whether the production can scale up. Of course, it can happen. We do have an example when the known as WHO's influenza vaccine technology transfer initiative. This started around 2007. Now, around say 13 years later, where we are now. So the data shows that WHO has, it is a very minimal amount WHO invested in this whole process. Now the capacity of this production of this influenza vaccine increased from 338 million doses to 600 million somewhere between 2007 and 2005, and they are expected to increase that production to around 1 billion doses. And not only that, these are of influenza vaccines of pandemic proportion, and also there are seasonal influenza is there, and around 4 to 5 countries have started production of seasonal influenza vaccine. And that apart, the Serum Institute, GPO, and BCHT Technologies, they have started working with the Institute of Experimental Medicine to develop to produce the LAIV vaccines, that the attenuated vaccine for influenza. So this shows that things can make it happen, and we do have examples before us. So let me stop it here. So what we need to ensure as a civil society organization working in the BRICS countries is that our countries should raise these issues and push for this kind of policy changes at the WHO as well as other international fora for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gopakumarji. You really made some crucial points, both on the structural changes that we as civil society, as citizens of BRICS states, as citizens of our countries can make and can push for in terms of the WHO policies, but also I think you and Felipe and Ari early on both agree on the point that the vaccines that are developed with the great investment of public funds should be sort of be a prerequisite for the accountability on the delivery of the eventual vaccines to the people that need them. You really seem to agree very much, three of you, on that point, having raised it, all of you. So I wonder if there are questions now to Mr. Gopakumar from our audience. I would highly encourage that. Or from other speakers, for that matter. Okay.
Sorry, Anton, please switch on your mic.
Yeah, okay. So,
yeah, sorry. I'm muting all the participants so they can ask their questions.
Okay, have you unmuted them?
Yep.
Okay, so are there any questions to Mr. Gopakumar in particular, or to other speakers as well, to Felipe and to Ari?
Well, I could, unless there are questions from the participants, I could start the discussion maybe with a
Sure.
question to Mr.
Over to
Kupakumar.
Sergey.
Yeah, thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. So I wanted to maybe hear your, before we sort of continue with the IP issue, I wanted to hear your thoughts on this COVAX facility. I saw there were some BRICS countries already expressing their interest. I think it was South Africa and Brazil, if I'm not mistaken. Well, but what's your view on this initiative? Would this be sort of sufficient to cover the needs within the next 2 years, or should there be something else to satisfy the demand for the vaccine globally? What's your view on this mechanism?
I think the COVAX facility, the details of what we are aware of shows that around 180, 70 plus countries expressed interest, but nothing has been translated into concrete actions. So the next week there are countries who agreed to pay the full cost. They are supposed to sign a binding agreement, advance purchase agreements. Then the role of the countries who are eligible for ODA will come. But the development shows that the things are not going at the right direction, precisely because there is a proposed, you might have read the articles published in Health Policy, and when Geneva Health File shows that the Gavi put up the concept of the countries can indulge in trade in vaccines as a vaccine exchange, like what you see it in the carbon trading. So you have you have a quota and you are not using, then you can sell it to somebody else. So this kind of ideas, the financialization of vaccine has been proposed. So that's in a way shows that they are not getting enough financial resource or traction to buy the vaccine. So it is completely then converting vaccine into a trading community. And second issue is that while the COVAX facility is supposed to do the bulk procurement, they are aiming to procure around 2 billion doses. But at the same time, European Union has its own bidding mechanism. There are many countries like US, UK, even a few countries within EU are also entering agreements with the vaccine manufacturers directly. So as a result, there is no clarity who is going to get the initial batches of production, produced vaccines. That's a first concern. Second concern, as per the global allocation mechanism, as I told you, 3% should go to health workers, then followed by the people at high risk, that is above 65, and then comorbidities. But now different actors have entered different agreements with these vaccine manufacturers, whether they will follow this 3%, then to high morbidity, high risk, and then to comorbidity. Will they go, or will they just use their money power and purchase whatever for them, and then rest go to the global COVAX facility? So we have no answers for all these concerns till date. So we do have problem. Then lastly, one point I sort of forget in my presentation is that while we set of sharing COVAX, the BRICS civil society can probably do that. The BRICS countries are also developing vaccines. So whoever is succeeding to produce these vaccines can share this know-how and this technology to other manufacturers in the BRICS countries, can then scale up the production. So one development today I read in the newspaper is that India is going to carry out the phase 3 trials of the Russian vaccine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So that's a good development. But at least the civil society in the BRICS countries can ask their respective government that at least you stood for an alternative development pathway. Now you are developing these vaccines. So why don't you, if it succeed, first of all, to collaborate in the development, and second, if successful, then share these technologies each other at least to scale up the production, and also with other developing countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a very good idea. I think we can definitely take it further as part of the recommendations from this group. Anton, over to you.
Yeah, well, I was just, if anyone else have a question to Mr. Gopakumar, I have a very quick follow-up, if you would allow me. So you mentioned, Gopakumarji, that it's eventually, according to the WHO plans, up to 20% that can get the vaccine by by the end of the next year, 2021. So you mentioned the priorities, but I wonder how the rest of the percentage of those who will receive the vaccine within this plan would be distributed. So obviously it's plus 65, people who are elder than 65 will be prioritized, but how the rest would be selected? Could you please clarify this?
So as of now, the WHO has put its global allocation mechanism. First, it goes to the health workers. That is roughly around 3% of the population.
Yeah, that's clear.
Then, then it goes to the elderly. Then it goes to the comorbidity. So that will roughly cover 20%. COVAX covers only, COVAX covers only 20% of the population. Beyond that, I think there is no thinking and there is no mechanism. There may be, the facility may extend in future, but as of now, they do not have any plan. They are not envisaging beyond 20%.
But these 20%, they well cover these two categories, 3% and...
Yeah, these three categories, especially these two categories, the health workers and the elderly.
Right, okay. So then, thanks a lot for these response, and I would like to yet again call for any questions to now the rest of the speakers, to Ari from South Africa, who spoke first, Felipe from Brazil, or to Gopakumarji from India. If you have any queries or any contributions or any follow-ups that you would like to make, please do you step forward. Okay, while you still might be thinking, I would like to ask Sergey to contribute his concluding remarks on the discussion. Maybe you could draw some points that were common in what all of the three speakers have raised, but also maybe what are the differences between the views that were expressed.
Thank you, Anton. Yeah, to avoid repeating what's been said, I think there were a couple of common topics that were mentioned by all the speakers, and just to use some key words to describe those, I would choose collaboration and policy reform. I mean, this vaccine development and access is a very complex topic, as Mr. Gopakumar mentioned during his presentation. This is not like a small molecule thing. It's a difficult process. It involves more complex molecules. So in order to really facilitate and scale up access, we would need real policy reform and collaboration between governments, and within countries, we need cooperation from all the stakeholders, the pharmaceutical companies, the governments, and the civil society. And our part as a, sorry, can you hear me? There's something changed. Yeah. Sorry, yeah, something changed on the screen. And as part of this process, we as civil society should really call upon our governments and other stakeholders in the countries to scale up this collaboration. And it has been particularly stressed by some of the presenters, Mr. Arias, for instance, that there should have been more cooperation within the BRICS countries. Although there were very important initiatives announced, such as the Vaccine Development Center and others, we could have used this leverage more. And we should do this more, especially in view of the pandemic. And as mentioned earlier, this vaccine development field is I think, is a good example where we could do that, given that, for example, we have vaccines already being developed by the BRICS countries. We have Chinese candidates, we have a Russian candidate, and as mentioned before, we could share this expertise to scale up production within BRICS. So that's one part. And as we're doing now, because there are already initiatives aimed at joint research, South Africa and India, we could participate in the development of the Russian vaccine in phase 3 trials. And my second thought would be that I think the BRICS countries would need to do more in terms of further pressing this TRIPS flexibility thing in the context of COVID-19. I really hope that this Brazilian bill for automatic licensing of all patents related to COVID will eventually succeed. And I think there is also a need to make some regulatory amendments in the Russian legislation in this field. I think there are already initiatives by government agencies such as the Anti-Monopoly Service already in place, and we need to support those so that we have a very robust and comprehensive pro-access regulatory framework. I think it would be crucial, as mentioned, I think by all of the participants, to have better and faster access to vaccines. So these are my last remarks. Over to anyone who would like to contribute as well. I think there is a question.
Yeah, please.
Marianne?
Yes, thanks very much. I'm Marianne Bonaventura from Oxfam, South Africa. And I'd like to respond to Ari Sitas's presentation, his conclusion, related to how COVID affects everybody. Things are invisible to the eye, and the call for wider and deeper protection. Ari raised 3 areas in terms of needing attention, highlighting the first one related to the care economy, which needs to be brought more into the focus, but also taking into consideration health services and the strain of, the support to nurses and security as well. So I'd like to inquire with the speakers from different countries, their perspective, in particular with the care economy. The BRICS countries have, most of them, not all, have received loans from the New Development Bank to support emergency response to COVID-19, and also, well, not beyond just the support from the NDB, but within BRICS economies. What are practical ways, or what is the thinking in terms of how to support the care economy in different ways, given this new context of COVID-19? Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Marianne, for this question. Who wants to go first? Ari, would you like to respond?
I guess he'll have, because he needs to chair the next Zoom meeting.
Right. Felipe or Gopakumarji?
I think Felipe, you.
Oh, go ahead, Gopa. I was not sure about the term economy. There was something, some
Care economy.
Yeah. I think,
the care economy.
I think it's basically precisely it brings to the point that we need to have a rethinking on the neoliberal policies in our respective countries. Okay, so that will enable us to reimagine and recalibrate our public policies to ensure what you call people to live their life with dignity. Okay, right to life in the in our Indian Constitution we say right to life includes the right to live with dignity. So therefore, there would be there could be a lot of changes in our the way in which our economy is designed, and the objectives of many of the policy measures so far we have been following in the last 20 years or plus. We need to recalibrate, and certain changes are required. Even regarding to the if it's a care economy, then then we need to focus mainly on some of the issues like the local production of health products, medical products. So far, we were thinking of, okay, irrespective of where the product is produced, whether it's in respective countries or elsewhere, as long as it is available through importation or even local production is cheap, it's fine. But now it shows that if it's a government, then it's care for people's health. It should maintain a certain degree of local production capabilities at the national level or at the regional level. So the economy needs to, economic policies, industrial policies, or the trade policies need to recalibrate or redesign to serve these purposes. When including, what earlier Professor mentioned about the rights which required for the people to live with dignity. So this is what I would say.
Felipe, would you like to follow up?
Yeah, no, very quickly. I think in general, this pandemic has also put on the spotlight the importance of public health systems. That it's important to say that we know that in many countries, public health systems were underfunded and being totally undermined by some policies. So I think this pandemic revealed how important it is to have in place public health systems that can diagnose and treat the huge demand that comes. So we hope that this can, as Gopa is saying, like reframe a little bit the debate and increase investments in many social areas. Healthcare, of course, would be in the top of the agenda, we think, for quite a while, but this can be a spillover effect in other important areas. So we understand more how we can provide the appropriate standards of dignity, as Gopa said, in those fields, and that we are also prepared to deal with this sort of pandemics and crises without leaving anyone behind. And that can only be done when you have sufficient health systems that are prepared. So we hope this whole discussion can also not further the dismantling of health systems, but rather make a review of policy thinking and show that how important it is to have those systems in place and the right policies in place.
Thanks a lot. Mariam, do you have a follow-up? I see that your hand is raised. Ah, okay, not anymore. Right, okay. Then, does anyone else has anything to contribute?
Just one final question from Gopa. Yep. Can I do a question?
Sure. Please go on, Felipe.
Yeah, because Gopa mentioned about trade secrets being shared by regulatory agencies. I just would like to understand if there is any country that is already trying to implement this kind of approach to ensure
not countries, actually. One of the there is a dispute going on between two companies, the contract manufacturer of or the company, the Gates Foundation and all, supporting that to come out with an vaccine. So this company sued its contract manufacturers for sharing the trade secret. They are saying that this particular manufacturer is not sharing the trade secret. So there is a dispute already. It is in the court in US. So that shows that the trade secret plays an important role. But what I am saying is that the regulatory agencies always act as a a police. So if you provide the data, okay, I'll approve it. Nothing beyond that. But the In this case, the regulatory agency should act as a facilitator, and whatever information it gets, that information it can share with the potential manufacturers or put it in the public domain, so that can be used by the potential manufacturers to avoid replication of many procedures, or they can copy the exact procedures. Okay, still the vaccine, the originator may not be sharing all the information, but there will be some substantial amount of information will be shared. Okay, some of it are protected at trade secret. So here the regulatory agencies can play a role that way as a facilitating agency for the competition in the market. So nothing in the TRIPS agreement prevents them from doing it, because it's a public health emergency.
Thanks a lot, Gopakumarji. So does anyone else have anything to contribute, follow up on? And if not, I would only would like to thank all of the three speakers. Thanks, Ari, Felipe, and thanks, Gopakumarji. And only echo what has been already said. And I'm really hoping that the Civil BRICS mechanism is also an additional platform that would eventually help us to boost collaboration and further push for policy change that we have discussed so much in detail today. And if Sergey, unless Sergey has nothing to add, I would like to draw this discussion to an end.
Yeah, thanks, Anton. Not at this point. And as I've said before, thank you very much for the speakers. And all of the issues raised today will be used as a basis for developing recommendations from the civil society working group for the BRICS leaders, and they will be taken into account and reworked as a set of practical steps to be taken further. So thank you very much for your inputs. That's really appreciated.
And thanks a lot to the participants and the viewers of the discussion on YouTube. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergey.
Thank
you
you.
very much for organizing.
Thank you.
Okay, cheers. Bye.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.